don't buy the hype. Crypto is macroeconomically insignificant. There is going to be, already is happening, a development that is going to change our lives, but it's not going to be Bitcoin or Ethereum or any of the crypto brothers and sisters fantasies. Well, to begin with, that it helps not to be the finance minister of a bankrupt country, but more seriously, the risk that is involved in such negotiations doesn't come from the markets, it comes from politics. So political risk is impossible to manage, and that is why it is so essential that whenever you are representing a government, you have the whole government behind you. So unity is absolutely essential. And when you are negotiating with a variety of institutions, whether it is the International Monetary Fund, as it is the case in Sri Lanka and other places, or whether it is the European Union, it is essential that you avoid a sequential bargaining structure, which is in the interests of the much more powerful institutions that you're negotiating with. That creates a lot of bargaining and negotiating risk that you should try to avoid. I approach them with immense respect for the people I talk to, while at the same time combining that respect with a very clear message to them that I understood the hidden agenda. I understood very well that they were creditors, that they were not interested in getting their money back because they knew they were not going to get their money back because they had lent it to a bankrupt nation under conditions of austerity that shrunk our income, and therefore they knew they wouldn't get their money back. It was other things that they were interested in, which they didn't want to discuss openly, but at the same time, one needed to signal to them that one understood their hidden agenda, respected it, but at the same time had a very clear agenda of his own or her own in pursuing these negotiations. We have a central bank without a state to have its back, and we have 19, 20, 21 now states without a central bank, which is really of their own. In the case of the United States with China, what you find is that there is a structural macroeconomic imbalance which underpins that relationship. In other words, the United States has a chronic, systematic, designed trade deficit with China. It is essential for China to be having the net exports which were necessary for China to grow. So both the United States and China depend on a fallacy, on an error of design. And therefore, any negotiations between the US Treasury Secretary and the Chinese authorities have to be founded on this understanding that there's always going to be conflict which springs out of a terrible institutional design. So, if you really want to paper over these differences, you can, but then they will appear in other forms very, very soon. True leadership means redesigning the institutional design. The problem with the question is that there is an erroneous axiom embedded in it. When we ask, is there going to be another financial crisis? We are assuming, and that is a big assumption, and actually a very wrong assumption, that the previous financial crisis, the one that started in 2008, has gone away. It never went away. It was dealt with the medical equivalent will be cortisone injected into a cancer patient. The patient looks quite recovered and sort of brisk and healthy, but the tumor is doing its evil deed under the surface, under the skin. The financial crisis of 2008 never went away. Quantitative easing simply papered over it, injected huge quantities of monetary cortisone into the patient. And what we've been having since 2008 is the same crisis metamorphosizing, changing its color, changing its shape, and reappearing in a variety of forms. The most recent one is inflation coupled with financial sector instability. Central banks are knocking themselves over the head with blunt instruments, screaming at the prospect of of finding an interest rate which simultaneously does not destroy the financial sector and stamps inflation. And such an interest rate simply doesn't exist. So the financial crisis is getting worse, but it completely changes its colors. It's a bit like a virus that metastasizes, a virus that mutates. Organizations need to understand that financial collapse is to capitalist firms what hell is to Christianity. Extremely unpleasant, but necessary for the system to work. So if your organization is going to survive a tsunami of collapses at some point, then you need to do something very special. Like, for instance, Goldman Sachs managed to survive 2008 when everybody else was collapsing around it. Unfortunately, they used rather immoral and unethical means in order to survive. What your organization needs to do is to find sources of resilience in technologies and products of the future that are essentially crisis-proof. This is not easy. This is why, if you are the CEO of such an organization, you deserve a very large payout. They just won't. Don't buy the hype. Crypto is macroeconomically insignificant. There is going to be, already is happening, a development that is going to change our lives, but it's not going to be Bitcoin or Ethereum or any of the crypto brothers and sisters fantasies. It is central bank digital currencies. I do not believe they will be using blockchain. They don't need to use blockchain, but that will be a revolution because it will mean disintermediation. It will mean that we will cut out the middleman between the central bank and your business and citizens and consumers. And that's something I'm very much looking forward to because it's going to be a genuine revolution and it will be a very pleasant one. But it won't come from the so-called sphere of the crypto craze that has dulled many senses and has stupefied many good people. Make sure you understand the concept of what I call cloud capital. That, capitalism is no longer what it used to be. Capital, which was the source of profit, and therefore the motive power of capitalism since the first industrial revolution, has mutated. It has transformed itself. Once upon a time, capital was produced means of production, like steam engines, industrial robots, things we manufacture so that they can help us manufacture other stuff. Today, cloud capital lives up in the cloud. It's not really the cloud, it's optic fibers on the bottom of the oceans. It is cell towers, it is server farms, and so on. That kind of capital, which I call cloud capital, has a completely different way of making its owners rich. It allows for the modification of our behavior to be automated. Not to rely on Don Draper, if you remember Mad Men, the advertisers, the marketers, but to automate the job of Don Draper, of the marketeers. Any business which does not possess large quantities of cloud capital, even if they are just car companies or if they are pharmaceuticals, they are going to find it very hard to navigate this new kind of capitalism, which is more kind of techno-feudalism, I call it. So, whatever your business is, invest in cloud capital. My job as a public speaker is cut through the inanities of the dominant paradigm, of the dominant narrative, and reveal what is really happening in the mind of decision makers, which they are not very keen to share, because their power comes from actually preserving a monopoly over that knowledge.